December 25th is a day which many millions of families all over the world look forward to. For children especially, the anticipation of opening all their presents on Christmas morning makes this an especially exciting time for them. And whilst, for many, this modern Christmas has less and less to do with religious observance, it's still a major celebration in homes worldwide. But did you know that Christmas was actually banned in Scotland right through until the 1950s? It's one of the main reasons why celebrating Hogmanay became such a big event north of the border. What's more, anyone daring to celebrate Christmas could even be arrested. It all started from the Scottish Reformation in 1560, when Scotland split from the Catholic Church and papacy, and adopted more Calvinist traditions led by John Knox. Up until then, Scotland had celebrated Yuletide, which was brought here in the 8th century by the Vikings. Although a pagan tradition to celebrate the winter solstice, Yuletide was adopted as a feasting day by the Catholic Church, although at the time it was no more important than any other feasting day in the religious calendar, and was certainly less important than Easter. Many of the Yuletide traditions remain to this day, such as kissing under the mistletoe, although burning a log from a Yule tree was largely put paid to thanks to central heating. But the powerful Kirk in Scotland at the time saw the Catholic Christmas celebrations as way too excessive to be truly Christ-like, and this led to the passing of a law in 1640, making any celebration of Christmas in Scotland illegal. After this, singing a carol or baking Yule bread could land you in court. Historian and author Dr. Tom Christie explains.
Christmas in Scotland is a very unusual phenomenon because we know that there have been celebrations for midwinter and in these cold winter months, really going back about 10,000 years. But the thing that interests people most about Scottish Christmas, of course, was the fact it was banned for around 400 years. Now, the reason for that can be traced back to the Reformation, where the Presbyterian authorities in Scotland were very sceptical of what had come before, and no longer was Christmas something to be celebrated, and something that was the cause for bacchanalian celebrations at court. They were very much of the opinion that religion should be a personal thing, that there should be very devout devotion and personal reflection, and that really celebration had no part in that. And they also felt that Christmas was essentially something that was unbiblical. That although there is a biblical account of the virgin birth, that there is no Christmas celebration mentioned in the Bible. So for those reasons, for many years, Christmas was frowned on. There were fines if people were heard to be singing Christmas carols. There were fines if people were found to be baking a Yule loaf, for instance. So for those reasons, of course, people came to associate Christmas essentially as being something that just became part and parcel of everyday life. People went out to work. It was perhaps observed in some cases as a religious day of special interest, but on other occasions there were ministers who would chastise their flock for reading the Bible on Christmas Day. It actually became that stringent. So really it takes you to about the 19th century before you start to see those attitudes change.
Although it's unlikely that anyone in Scotland had actually been jailed for celebrating Christmas during this time, the festive season in Scotland from 1640 until 1958 was a pretty grim time for many. However, some better-off members of Scottish society started to celebrate Christmas behind closed doors from around the 19th century.
We don't really see a relaxation in attitudes towards Christmas really until the 19th century. It's at that point that children start to receive gifts, usually a fairly humble selection of gifts. It could be perhaps an apple and an orange and a low-denomination coin. But in terms of adults, really much of it would tie into the Victorian popularisation of Christmas. It was Queen Charlotte who first introduced a Christmas tree to the UK in 1800. But it takes you until Victoria and Albert until these celebrations are really being popularised. The traditions that we've come to take for granted now, the turkey dinner, we start to see crackers being introduced. All of these things are really thanks to the Victorians and of course to Charles Dickens for popularising it. But if you're celebrating that in Scotland, it's only because you're very, very well off. The average person, really it was something for the kids to enjoy. It really takes until the 20th century before that is relaxed. And in some ways for the authorities, that's a good thing, because, for instance, in the First World War, you have situations whereby English troops would be taking the holiday over Christmas and Scottish troops over Hogmanay. So it allowed for divisions to be cycled in a much more efficient way on the rota. But really it didn't become a holiday until the late 50s, 1958. And even then it wasn't observed. People's parents would go out to work and pretty much things would continue as normal. It's not really until the 70s, where there was a letter writing campaign by MPs, that things started to shift into the direction that we have now, whereby Christmas was being observed as a public holiday. People had the day off, and the traditions started to harmonise with the rest of the UK.
A group of Lenin's revolutionary communists who were sent to Glasgow prior to the First World War to ferment revolution were so shocked at how miserable Christmas in Scotland actually was, they had to decorate the home where they were staying.
Scotland's reluctance to take part in Christmas celebrations has actually become quite legendary throughout the world. And no better is that illustrated than when the Petrov family came to stay with John Maclean, who was a trade union leader in Scotland in the lead up to the First World War. Now they had come from a tradition in Russia, very much in the Bolshevik line of enthusiasm towards Lenin's uprising, and which would come, of course, in 1917. They were aghast when they came to Scotland. There are no trees, there are no decorations, and they had to go out and decorate the home that they were staying in, which they were just amazed by it. But over in Russia, Lenin was having a crackdown. He actually said that anybody who was found taking the day off on Christmas was to be shot if they were, celebrating St Nicholas over their allotted work. So consequently, it's a very, very strange combination. Whilst there was no chance of being shot in Scotland for celebrating Christmas, it certainly shows that it really wasn't a celebration that would be picked up on until well into the 20th century.
For the vast majority of Scots, working on Christmas Day is now just a distant memory, as are many Hogmanay traditions such as first footing.
Because Hogmanay was really the epicentre of Scottish winter celebrations, many of the traditions that we now come to associate with Christmas were transposed by that extra week onto New Year's Eve. And for that reason, the first mention of Santa Claus in the UK was made in the John O'Groat Journal in the 19th century, where a journalist from Wick was astonished to find out there was this figure who was giving presents to the local kids and how excited they were that this was happening. But when was it happening? Not Christmas Eve, Hogmanay. So when you get into the 20th century and you start to see these traditions become homogenised between Scotland and its friends and neighbours, things all start to change. Hogmanay is still very much a time of partying. There's lots going on. There's first footing with a lump of coal, perhaps. These things are continued amongst neighbours and amongst communities, really into, I suppose, the 80s and 90s. And it's only just really been in recent years where Christmas has become the recognised international festival that it is, where we can enjoy Christmas markets, perhaps with other European nations, television. Obviously, there's more of a harmonisation in terms of Christmas specials and programming. So really, yes, I think that's the case. It's really just been in the last few decades that you can say that really the situation has changed, and the Hogmanay and Christmas have taken either equal footing or one has overtaken the other in terms of the celebrations in the winter months.
But despite Christmas being banned in Scotland for hundreds of years, there has been a significant Scottish influence on the big day. For example, the first ever Christmas card was produced in Leith in 1841, and the Charles Dickens character Ebeneezer Scrooge was based on a Scot, although the real Ebeneezer, like the vast majority of Scots, was a very jovial and generous man in real life.
Scotland has a lot of literary connections to Christmas. People like Robert Louis Stevenson, for instance, had written about Christmas several times in his career. But I think, as far as I'm concerned, the most remarkable connection comes from Charles Dickens, because in 1840, Dickens came to visit Edinburgh to do readings from his work, and no one knew that he had this idea for a Christmas ghost story. But when he'd finished his reading, he decided to take a walk through the twilight streets of Edinburgh and came across a cemetery which contained a gravestone. Now, he believed this gravestone had the inscription, Ebeneezer Scrooge, a mean man. And he went back to his hotel and he thought, well, do you know, they often say that the Scots are a parsimonious bunch, but if they're calling him mean, how mean must this man have been? This is incredible. Now, what Dickens didn't realise was that this grave allegedly had belonged to Ebeneezer Scroggie, who had been a Kirkcaldy-born grain merchant who lived at the Grass Market in Edinburgh. Now, quite unlike certain misers from Dickens' fictional writing, Scroggie had been an exceptionally generous, sharp-dressing man who was very jovial and had really played a part in Edinburgh life. When King George came to visit Edinburgh to meet Sir Walter Scott, it was Scroggie who had provided the brandy for that meeting. Now, he had died in 1836, and it was only through a trick of the light that Dickens had got his name wrong. But the interesting thing was, as a grain merchant, he would have been known as a mealman, and that's where the misunderstanding came from. But I think we know that Scroggie was a jovial enough chap, that he would have certainly had a laugh from the idea that Ebeneezer Scrooge would be born soon afterwards and would become probably the most famous miser of all time.
And the Scottish influence on Christmas has continued, says Tom Christie.
Now, what's really intriguing is when you get into the 70s and 80s and Christmas is starting to become more homogenised, that's at the same time that there's this huge boom in Scottish creativity regarding Christmas, almost as though there's a reassessment of what it means and how it's celebrated. So we start to see albums with a Christmas theme, we start to see the emergence of new books, even people like Muriel Spark, very well-known authors, and we also see TV and film specials as well. We see films like Comfort and Joy by Bill Forsyth, which is a remarkable time capsule of Christmas in Glasgow in the 80s. We see lots of TV specials with popular series including City Lights, Rab C. Nesbitt and Still Game. All of these things all arrive around the same time, and I think the amazing thing about it is whilst we can celebrate Christmas as an international festival that brings people together all over the world, it's also something that can be celebrated in a way that is uniquely Scottish.
Tom Christie's fascination with Christmas centres around how this event has, despite its religious origins, united people of different faiths or no faith the world over, with its themes of family, community and altruism.
Well, I've long had an interest in Christmas because as an international celebration, I think it's one thing that brings people together. And it seems odd that something that has its roots in religion brings people together when often it can be seen as something that is divisive. But in actual fact, it has become a universal celebration that people of all faiths and no faith have taken part in. The reason for that, of course, is because there are so many universal themes behind it. There is a sense of family and community, there's a sense of altruism, and there's a sense of spreading joy and goodwill. And for that reason, I think really since the 1940s, we start to see these themes promoted in film and to a lesser extent on television, as has been the case, of course, in literature for many years as well. And that, of course, follows a long-standing tradition with hymns and carols that have really helped to propagate all of those themes. So I've always been fascinated at exactly how Christmas has been depicted and the various different ways in which it has changed, developed and evolved, but those core themes still remain so important and so celebrated right around the world.
Tom Christie has written a number of books related to Christmas. This one, Scotland's Christmas, he co-wrote with Dr. Murray Cook.
My interest in Christmas goes back a long way. because I've written a series of books which details the history of Christmas cinema through the 20th century. But this was a slightly different project. I worked with my friend Dr. Murray Cook, who's an archaeologist, on Scotland's Christmas, which is a full-length history of Christmas in Scotland, going back 10,000 years to very early Neolithic celebrations right up to the present day. And I think for both of us actually, the really appealing aspect of the project was the fact that we were able to look at not just the sweep of history and how Christmas had affected Scotland and vice versa, but also some of the really unusual aspects of the celebration over the years. There's a lot of folklore, for instance. There is the Wolver up in Shetland Islands, who is a werewolf-like creature who's been associated with Christmas because he leaves a slice of fish as a gift on people's windowsills if that person is in need in the community. And on the Western Isles, of course, we have the chimney demon. Now, the chimney demon is someone who whispers down your chimney at nights over Christmas, and that's the reason why you need to make sure that your Yule log continues to burn. There's also the Night of the Candles, which is very popular in the round about the Highlands and in the islands as well. That's where someone lights a candle in their window on Christmas Eve to help guide the Holy Family to Jerusalem. Now, you might say, if you're in the Highlands and you're looking for Jerusalem, you probably need all the help you can get. So that's where the candles come in. But yeah, there's so many interesting stories. I never realised, for instance, that the first Christmas card allegedly predates Sir Henry Cole by 2 or 3 years. This was a stationer in Leith called Charles Drummond, and about 1840 to 1841 he had the idea of having a Christmas card, a greetings card that you could send to your family. For whatever reason it didn't take off, and he thought, there's no mileage in this idea then. And it wasn't until just after the Second World War that the brass plates used to make that card were discovered, and the original card in fact traced to Leith Town Hall. So that's how we know that it predated Hall, who, it has to be said, made a fantastic success of the Christmas card shortly after, but having such a close association with the Royal Mail probably helped.
There can be little doubt that Christmas traditions around the world have become increasingly homogenized in recent years. As technology and travel makes the world smaller and people worldwide watch Christmas movies created in Hollywood, local customs begin to fade out in favor of a more uniform celebration. With this in mind, what changes will the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come bring to this popular worldwide event in 100 years' time?
So we've talked a little bit about the ghosts of Christmas past and present, but when it comes to the ghost of Christmas future, I imagine the question really is, what kind of form might that take? If one thing can be said about Christmas, it is that it is an adaptable celebration. It's one that has endured even when everything from the establishment to circumstance have been against it. And even in the darkest of times, historically speaking, Christmas has been there. So I think it's fair to say that how people celebrate Christmas may change. We see lots of people going on holiday now for Christmas and experiencing different aspects of the celebration in different countries, which is a good thing. It broadens people's knowledge of how other people celebrate Christmas. We also see, for instance, a move away from the living room Christmas experience with things like Morecambe and Wise, getting tens of millions of viewers. Now, thanks to streaming television, people can enjoy any combination of Christmas programming that they like, and can very much choose their own ultimate collection of festive programming. So I think as long as it brings people together, as long as there is cause to celebrate, and as long as there is a chance of spreading goodwill, I don't think Christmas is in danger of going anywhere anytime soon.
If you have enjoyed this film, please like, share and subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit that notification bell icon to be informed about other great Scottish content. The book Scotland's Christmas by Dr. Thomas A. Christie and Dr. Murray Cook is available from all good book retailers. For details, visit extremispublishing.com/scotlandschristmas.html. For more information about the Scotland Channel, visit our website thescotlandchannel.tv.